Welcome back to Morning Trade Live. It's time for Chart Master, and we're taking a look at a few key names. The fundamentals, Jenny Horne's all over that. And as far as the charts, looking at those technicals, Rick Ducat is ready. So we take a look at three semiconductor stocks, and we start with Taiwan Semi. Jenny, what is it that we're looking at when it comes to Taiwan Semi?
So, okay, I will say, I know we have an analyst note to get to, but they also did have some news that from Taiwan Semi that their Japan chip factory is facing delay while the U.S. expansion is overall taking that priority. So that is interesting, the ways in which right now the entire, feels like semiconductor world is shifting more and more of its focus to doing things more affordably. But nonetheless, we also know that right now, in terms of Taiwan Semiconductor, they have committed to invest another $100 billion to ramp up manufacturing here in the U.S. over the next half a decade. So that's seemingly taking some priority right now. Now, additionally, we did get a note out of Barclays, who raised their price target to 240 from 215 with an overweight rating, saying that the scope for upside in advanced logic, but now downside risk and memory remains now in 2026. They also really highlighted the fact that after hearing some commentary from management, Taiwan Semiconductor even said the U.S. tariffs were having some impact on the company, but demand continues to remain strong as well as overall outpace supply. At shareholder meeting, we heard from the CEO, who also did say tariffs have some impact on Taiwan Semiconductor, but not directly. That's because tariffs are imposed on importers, not exporters. And Taiwan Semiconductor does still remain an exporter. However, he did acknowledge that tariffs can lead to these higher prices. And when prices go up, then demand could go down. So this name still has, very solidly a lot of bulls behind it. Of the only 19 analysts that cover this stock, there's 18 buys. There's one hold. There's no bears in Taiwan Semi. And the average price target right now around 217. So that does imply about 11% upside from where we are currently trading, Nicole.
Okay, let's take a look here at the chart. Rick, your thoughts on this chart today?
Yeah, so this one is a typical shape we've seen across the board for so many tech stocks lately. We had a situation where we topped out here, 226.40 in this case, in late January, early February, then a severe decline, bottoming out during our tariff news related chaos, and then a upswing that has taken us above our downward sloping trend line here and above this green line, 188, a notable low, and then a point that we have retested and held so far. The moving averages that we follow, yellow 21-day, orange 63-day, and purple 252-day. Prices above all three of them. They're all continuing to diverge farther apart, which suggests the trend is still in play to the upside here. However, when we look at RSI, our measure of momentum, we can see that there's a bit of bearish divergence that has been taking place here. Price has made some successively higher closes, but RSI has been trending downward here. So not exactly what you'd want to see if you're bullish in this name, but could just be indicative of a consolidation phase here before another leg up or a more general slowdown. You don't really know either way. That's why you'd want to look for other confirmatory signals or price information. One such example would be if we were to break below that 188 level, which also lines up very closely with our 21-day EMA, that would be a downside move to be on the lookout for. If we were to add our other studies, volume profile, and standard deviation channels, we can see here that that's also the site of our linear regression line, that area near 190, 188 or so, a key downside level to monitor. Volume picks up again here near about 201, 202, that general area. And then we've got this red line here, 212, representing a significant old high point here and low points and high points there. So a downside, 188, 190, upside around 212.
Thank you for that. And so let's turn our attention now over to Broadcom. So we look at Broadcom, AVGO. Jenny, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so this name has earnings, so that makes it a bit of a different story for that, of course, very reason. We have second quarter earnings out June 5th after the close. So Citi today adding to some enthusiasm ahead of those numbers, raising its price target to 276 from 210 with a buy rating, saying they expect now Broadcom to report results above consensus, driven by the overall continued AI strength, saying that with the company's non-AI semi business down roughly 40% from its peaks, the business should recover from current levels and offset most of the gross margin dilution from its AI business. They also increased their estimates on this AI strength, and they do see estimates upside to their estimates throughout 2025. However, when looking at the entire space, since we're looking at three very similar names today, I will note that Taiwan Semiconductor right now on a forward PE basis is the cheapest at around 21 times. Now, Broadcom, of the 10 names I looked at closely linked to these companies, would be at the higher end with a 37 times forward PE ratio right now. So that makes it a bit more expensive, but also this name is pretty much sitting at highs here. So I guess you could argue that we've seen performance that somewhat has matched that, but many right now just taking on a more sidelined approach because we need to see these numbers and we need to see more and more of that AI business continue to outshine its legacy business, which still has several other areas that it operates that are not linked to AI, but they've done a good job framing these earnings calls as of late to be like an AI pure play, basically.
Yeah, you noted Citigroup adjusting the price targets 276 from 210 with a buy rating, talking about the improvement in the new gear that's meant to improve AI chip performance. It just seems there is certainly a lot of good news here, and Broadcom on track for a record close today. Well, let's take a look at the chart, Rick.
At a glance, this chart might look similar to the other tech names for the reasons that I described it in our previous name here, but there's some really important differences. First is that we did have that same situation where we topped out here around that same time, kind of the latter part of last year, and then once again here in that late January period. But then when we had our decline, we did not make a new significant low. We held on above those old lows from August and later in that month in September. So around 140 held on. We have since rallied. Now we are overtaking those old highs at our red line here near 250, on pace for a higher close and a higher intraday high as well. Similar to our last chart here, though, we can see that we had our moving averages are moving upward here. They're diverging apart from each other and continuing to show a strong, uninterrupted trend so far. I mean, that could change here. If we were to see our yellow 21-day EMA perhaps start to shift from an upward slope to a downward slope, that could be a sign of potential trend change, an early warning sign. So we can also see here when we look at the RSI, our measure of momentum, it's a situation that we had sort of similar to our last one here, where momentum was starting to wane. Mostly it stayed in the overbought area, though, but then price has resumed its uptrend. Momentum is making new relative highs along with price, and it's back in the overbought area once again. A reading of 80 on the RSI is quite high. It only goes up to 100. So we're showing some strong momentum heading into this earnings event. Typically what you would want to see if you were bullish in this name is what's happening. New highs and strong momentum.
I like that RSI. We don't normally see it so high, as you noted. Thanks for pointing that out, as well as all the details on the chart. Let's turn our attention over to ASML, and this one losing a fan over at Barclays. What's going on here with ASML today, Jenny? What are you watching?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because I do feel like it gets absolutely punished on its earnings. But today, Barclays saying that, well, this company does still have a virtual monopoly on the machines that are used to manufacture the latest chips, which has made it vital for the global semiconductor industry. They're expecting a slowdown. So they're saying the stock right now isn't necessarily a good bet, changing their rating to equal weight from overweight with a price target that was trimmed by about 120 or so euro to around 740 US dollars when converting, just for simplicity's sake. But they did highlight this risk right now to the expectation for growth in 2026. They're modeling a 1% growth rate, but at this point think they're downside to even their estimates. And there's an increasingly tough setup right now for orders while they're still reported, and they need to even then improve pretty materially from here to have comfort on that 2026 growth. So in 2023 and 2024, this story saw a huge wave of revenue spurred on by China as the country looked to expand its ship-making capacities. But however, we could expect that to slow this year or even slow further into 2026 as U.S. sanctions limit the number of Chinese companies that ASML can ship to. So this is somewhat a company that is on the other end of the various trade battles. We oftentimes talk about the ways U.S. companies are trying to rethink their supply chain to be more domestic, but ASML does the majority of its business still overseas. So while I do think this is an interesting one, it does have these extreme ultraviolet lithography machines, which is what it specializes in. It's also right now very niche, and to me right now in the widespread AI world, you need to have like multi-use, very complex types of technology in AI, which again, this is definitely that, it's just very niche.
Yeah, and look, Barclays downgraded this one to the equal weight, but you mentioned how in Taiwan Semi, Barclays was their price target hikes for Taiwan Semi, so different picture there. Let's get back to the ASML chart at 740, Rick. What stands out to you?
So this chart is the most different of the three. Unfortunately, though, it's maybe the weakest one of the three here. So what we have is a longer, more gradual downtrend here, beginning after this gap down that we saw on earnings. We sank lower. We connected these highs here. Then we could keep going further. We touched our trend line several times here. But recently, we pushed to the upside. Now, after our initial gap up, price didn't really make that much upside progress, though. Rather, it kind of just drifted sideways here between about 720 and 760 or so, 770. And we can see that also, critically, we did not take out this level, 782, high point, high point, high point here. We tried to make another attempt at it during the last rally, but didn't quite get there. So that level would be noteworthy to watch. Take a look here, though. Our moving averages are also moving sideways, suggesting lack of trend directionality and more range-bound prices. So this sideways drift is not really what you would want to see. We can also see that we have drifted beyond our trend line here, our upward sloping trend line beginning with those lows here near 578. So for now, it's seeming like we're slowing down a bit after our initial jump to the upside. Maybe we can also see that our momentum indicator, the RSI, is still traveling downward here. If we get a move below that 50 midline, that would be a further bearish sign, especially if we also started to deteriorate and move below our moving averages that we follow here. So if we were to look at our volume profile study, we can see that this point of control here lines up with this important region. So around 715 to 750 or so, that's where we've got our point of control, our moving averages, and our previous range-bound price activity. So if we were to move below that level, a drop below 715 or so, that opens the door to this area right here. You can see our volume node here near about 670. That could be further support. If we were to move to the upside, 782, that's the obvious level that many traders would have their eye on. That could trigger the upside breakout if price were to breach that point.
All right, Taiwan Semi, we looked at Broadcom, we looked at ASML here. Thank you both, Jenny Horne and Rick Ducat.